And we are back for another episode of the Productivity Show. My name is Tan Pham, founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today I have my co-host Brooks Duncan. How are you today?
I'm great. How's everything going with you?
I'm doing pretty good. For those who don't know who you are, Brooks, what is your role at Asian Efficiency? What do you do?
I'm aware of very many hats. I guess you could sum it up by saying the operations director, but if there's something going on, I probably have my hands in it in some way. But most relevant today is one of the co-hosts of the Productivity Show.
Yeah, well, internally we call you the Entreport savior or the CRM expert because you're like a ninja when it comes to that. But that's a topic for another day. Today we're going to be talking about goal setting, specifically as we're going through the midway year point now. We kind of want to check in with you and see, are you still on track to hit your goals? Or if you lost your goals, what can you do about this? And we're going to walk you through a really simple framework that we use internally at Asian Efficiency and that we use ourselves here. So you're going to find this hopefully really helpful and to help you reevaluate where you are with your goals. Now, if you've been following us for a while, you know that we always like to start off with our top 3 favorite productivity resources as of lately. And I'm going to share some of my favorite here with you here today. So the first one is a tool that I use almost every other day, I want to say, and it's called a SoWrite. So it's spelled PSORITE, SoWrite. So SoWrite is this plastic mold that allows you to kind of like self-massage yourself. It's a way to kind of like release tension in your body, in your muscles. A lot of like UFC fighters use this particular tool, and it's mostly targeted towards your psoas muscles, which is the muscle kind of like between your abs and your back. And it releases a lot of tension in that particular area, which is very difficult to get. So if you have a lot of tension around your lower back, around your glutes, around your abs, this is a great tool to have. It's a really simple plastic mold. It's kind of expensive, but worthwhile having, especially if you work out a lot. My second recommendation for today is a supplement. Again, we are not medical experts by any means, so take this with a grain of salt and consult your own doctor before taking this. But it's a glutathione supplement. So if you like drinking wine or any alcoholic beverage, but you don't want to have any hangovers, this is the supplement for you. It's a supplement that you can get anywhere. You can buy it on Amazon. You don't need a prescription for something like this. It's readily available. If you've ever done an IV drip for quote unquote hangovers, this is the thing that they always put in the IV drip, which is glutathione. And it's a natural antioxidant that helps you detox and cleanse the liver. And so the trick here is that if you take one capsule of glutathione, which is usually about 250 milligrams, for every beverage that you have, you will not have any hangovers the next day. And I've personally tested this. So if you like drinking wine and beers and alcoholic beverages at night, but not feel like you want to have poor sleep or have any hangover effect the next day, this is the thing you want to have. And the third one is a book called Attached, The New Science of Adult Attachment. It's a book on dating and relationships. It's a very profound book, and I recommend it for everyone to read, even if you are married, happily married, you've been in a relationship for a long time. It's a really interesting way to look at your relationships and how you can show up for your partner in a very new and enlightening way. So whether you're single, dating, or married, read this if you want to have better and happier relationships. And we will have links to all of this in the show notes. So Brooks, we're going to be talking about goal setting here today. Who is this episode really targeted for?
Well, like you said, we're at the halfway point of the year. So it's very possible that many people listening to this, and there's no judgment if this is the case, but it's very possible that many people listening to this, even though it's the half year point, haven't made goals for this year. We want to definitely reassure you that it is not too late to do that. So if that is your situation, this will help you make and get ahead of making good goals for the rest of the year. However, if you're somebody who has made goals, but you're just always struggling with accomplishing those goals, like you make them, you start out at the start of the year and you're like, yes, this year it's going to happen. But by mid-year or even before, those goals have kind of gone off the wayside. We're going to talk about some strategies that will help you with that. And even if you're somebody who does tend to meet your goals, there's always ways that we can improve and do better. If we're consistently nailing our goal, that's probably a sign that maybe we should up it a little bit. And we're going to be talking about that in this episode as well.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about goal setting before on the podcast if you've been following us for a while. So we have a ton of episodes on that. So we will link to some of those in the show notes as well. So you can kind of go back and see kind of our framework. But we're going to be talking specifically about Q2 goals and kind of like our midway check-in with ourselves and say, hey, this is the goal I set for myself at the beginning of the year. And I kind of want to show you what we've done up to this point so you can kind of learn from our process and see what you can copy and steal from the way we do things and apply that to your own life. So Brooks, let's just dive right into this. What was your goal for this year and where are you with that?
Yeah, so this has been a funny experiment this year, I guess I'd say. Like you said, we talked about at the start of the year in TPS 281 when we were talking about setting goals for the year. We both laid out goals that we were going to have. It was a little interesting sharing goals on the podcast like that, but we decided to try it and do it publicly. And then, if you haven't listened to it already, TPS 294, we revisited them at Q1, and it was kind of funny because we didn't plan ahead of time. We didn't share what our goals were. We didn't share our progress. So we kind of found out on the podcast where we are with that. So that was kind of fun. So for myself, my goal that I outlined at the start of the year was to create and maintain a journaling habit for 2020. This is something that I decided was causing me a lot of problems not having that because I had been inconsistent in the past. So that was my big goal for 2020 to do that. And as of our Q1 check-in, that was going pretty well. And now at our mid-year check-in, still going very strong. And in fact, which we'll talk about as a result of our Q1 check-in, I even upped the goal a little bit because I was doing so well on it, and yeah, still going strong. How about you? I know your goal at the beginning of the year was not your goal at the Q1 check-in. So why don't you share your path there?
Yeah, so a quick recap for those who haven't followed us for a while. So at the beginning of the year, I said, okay, I want to become a competent salsa dancer and be able to walk into any salsa club anywhere in the world and then dance the night away. And then midway through, I realized, actually, you know what? This is not the right goal for me at this particular time. So I changed it to focus on having more relaxation in my life. I took a blood test and I found out that there were certain things I can do to optimize my life. Everything was in general pretty good. I was pretty healthy already, but there were certain things I could take it to like the 99th percentile if I wanted to. So I started to focus on that. And then the funny thing is, once I started focusing on that, this whole pandemic thing started happening. And so even if I wanted to do salsa or anything like that, I couldn't do it anyway. So I kind of switched goals at the perfect moments at the right time. So I'm kind of excited to kind of share some of the lessons I've learned since then of what I've been doing and how I've been able to alleviate a lot of stress, get rid of a lot of stress, actually introduce better sleep into my life, and have been able to stick to it.
Yeah, it was funny revisiting that that podcast episode, the Q1 podcast, TPS 294. It was funny revisiting that because we recorded it right before all the pandemic and quarantine stuff happened. So we had no idea when we were talking about that that was what was about what was about to come. And yeah, you didn't know it at the time, but you made a very prescient pivot because there's no way, even if you hadn't already dropped that goal, there's absolutely no way that you would have been able to succeed. So yeah, we want to check in and see how things are going. And I have no idea if this is how things are going with your goal. We also are going to share what we've learned through the first half of this year and how we're applying that for the rest of the year. But before we dive into that and we start talking about this more, I want to really make the point that we know that listening to other people's goals is not super exciting. It's like listening to other people's dreams, right? So what we want and the way we're going to talk about this is not so much focusing on our individual goals. That's not the big takeaway to learn how Brooks has been doing journaling and how Tan has been maxing and relaxing relaxing in 2020. Really, what we want you to take from this episode is how you can apply some of the strategies that we've used on our goals to your own goals so you can move forward. So, Tan, I have a question for you. It's the halfway through the year, like we've said. What if somebody isn't sure if that goal is right for them? Like, is it okay to drop a goal mid-year or totally change to new goals? Like, if you change your goal mid-year, doesn't that make you a quitter or somebody who can't execute or somebody who can't #crush it? Like, doesn't that mean you're giving up if you change your goals?
Well, does that mean that I'm a quitter if I change my goal?
That is what I was trying to imply nicely. Yeah. Tan, are you a quitter?
Well, thank you for giving me a new nickname. I don't think so. I think it's completely normal to change your goals because circumstances change all the time, right? If you get fired for whatever reason, that's going to put a new perspective on your resources available, your time availability, what you need to accomplish, what's urgent for you, right? And once this pandemic happened, I'm sure a lot of things changed for you as well, right? So if you had to change your goals because of that, completely normal, right? So circumstances change all the time, whether it's us getting fired, being let go, something like a pandemic, maybe every 20, 30 years or so, or something else. Maybe you just got divorced or there's a health concern in your family and now you have to take care of an elderly person. Things change all the time, right? So one of the best things we can do is have a check-in with ourselves and say, hey, is it still possible to accomplish this goal, or is this still the most important thing? And if it's not due to external circumstances or even internal circumstances, it's okay to change, right? And I think the way I look at it is to say the best way we can empower ourselves is to say, hey, am I making the right decision for this particular moment? And when we think about that, we have to take into consideration everything that's around us, right? Including the external circumstances and everything. And if everything is normal, then maybe we can continue on our path and the goal that we set out for ourselves. But if things have drastically shifted, maybe that requires us to change focus a little bit, right? And so, especially for a lot of you who are listening, I'm sure the pandemic changed a lot of things for you where you had to change priorities. So changing your goals, didn't make you a better person or a worse person. It just you just made a different decision. So I don't think there's any guilt associated with changing your goals midway or even every 90 days.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out is that if you are on the fence about your goals, like you made a goal at the beginning of the year, you're not really sure if you should change it or not, or you're not really sure if you should double down on your goal for the rest of the year. We actually recorded a podcast very recently, TPS304, so just a month ago. It's called "How Do You Know When a Goal Is Worth Pursuing?" So definitely recommend, if you're not totally sure if those goals you made you want to keep, check out that podcast episode and we take you through a framework for figuring that out. How about when you're midway through the year, you're in June, July, even maybe August, and especially in a time of uncertainty like we have right now still, do you think it's even worth making goals for the rest of the year, or even if people are listening to this later, like even Q3 or something like that? Do you think it's worth making goals for the remainder of this year, or do you think people should just like ride it out and then get it refocus for the next year? What's your thoughts about how long you need to make effective goals?
That's like saying, Brooks, do you want to change your life right now, or do you want to change your life next year? What's the option that you want to pick there? Do you want to be rich today, or do you want to be rich 90 days from now? What's your option there? Or what is your pick there, Brooks? I don't think it's ever too late to start anything, right? Whether we are 60 years old and we want to pursue a goal, whether it is 23, we just got out of college, we want to pursue something. The best time to start anything was yesterday, right? But the second best time is to start now. So I don't think it's ever too late. And so if you feel like you're behind, or if you are not on track as your parents hoped you would be, I wouldn't worry about that because everyone has their own journey, right? Not everyone's going to be like a millionaire before 30. Not everyone's going to be financially set for life, after 45. Everyone has their own journey and their own trajectory. So don't worry about what other people are doing. Focus on what you are doing. And if you have to start today learning how to tap dance or how to learn salsa or learn how to cook or be a good partner in a relationship, it's never too late to start that, right? So whether you started last quarter, today, starting tomorrow, it's never too late to start. But I just wouldn't wait until say, hey, I'm going to do this next quarter or next year, because chances are it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, we have a course in the dojo, which is our online productivity community, called How to Be Purposely Productive and Make Progress Towards Your Goals. So if you are looking to start out on making goals for the rest of the year, which I totally agree, it's definitely never too late to that, recommend checking out that course, and it will help you implement a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today. All right, so let's talk about our goals, our framework, and how we made sure, and the tweaks we kind of made along the way. So just want to do another check-in. So the goal you identified in the TPS294 Q1 about relaxing, that is still your goal for the rest for 2020?
Yeah, same goal. Just trying to have as minimal stress as possible in my life and as much enjoyment as possible. So less work, more enjoyment.
All right, and same for me. So my journaling, creating a journaling habit is still my goal for this year. It's still rolling along, and so I want to make sure to continue that for the rest of the year. So we don't have the shock and drama that we had last at the end of Q1 with Tan's surprise change, but that's okay, because sometimes going forward on your current goal is what really helps you go farther. So no problem at all. So let's talk about what we've done in 2020 and what people listening can do to prepare for our goal and set ourselves up for success. So that's, I think, the first thing we can talk about. For me, what I did is I made my goal. The first thing I did was to make the goal specific, because initially it was what I mentioned earlier, which is be more consistent with journaling, which sounds good, but what does that mean? So what I did is I adjusted that to be a number that can be that we can track and organize. So for myself, what I did is I decided that by the time I get to the end of 2020, I wanted to have 240 journal entries. So which is about 5 times a week journaling. That was my goal. But at the end of Q1, I realized that was I was doing too well on it. So what I decided to do was bump it up to 6 times a week. So that's about 288 journal entries by the way that I calculated it. So that's what I did. I made it measurable and very specific so that I'd have something to work towards. How about you? What did you do to prepare for your goal?
One of the keys I have found for successful goal setting and successful goal getting, right? So not just setting goals, but actually accomplishing them as well, is to make it as measurable as possible. So kind of like how you mentioned, Brooks, how you went from 240 to bumping up that number even more. I have found that the more things I can measure and clarity I have around my progress, the more likely it is that I will actually accomplish my goal, right? So for me, relaxation or working less comes down to, okay, am I actually working less? Am I tracking that in terms of like hours worked or other activities that I'm doing? And so I said to myself, okay, here's the thing that I'm going to track. One is I'm using an app called Dailyo. So Dailyo is a mood tracking app. You can download it on the App Store. And so I've been using it every day to kind of like check in with myself at 8 o'clock at night to fill in my mood. What was my mood for that particular day, right? And I start using it just to kind of get a trend of what's going on and kind of seeing how I can correlate certain activities or how many hours I've worked to general mood. Another thing I'm starting to keep track of is how often do I do any sort of relaxing activity. So relaxing activity could be something like taking a nap, going to the sauna, doing hot and cold tubs. So there's this place in Austin called Generate Athlete Live, which I've taken you to, Brooks. It's that place where you were laying down, you had those boots on, those Normatec boots, and you had your muscles compressed and relaxed on your legs. And afterwards you went, Tan, this is amazing. My feet feel amazing. Remember that?
The first thing I did when I came home was to look up how much those things cost, and it's like, nope, I think I don't think I'll be buying that. So it's great that you have a facility nearby where you can do it, because it definitely it was amazing. I never felt anything like it.
So think of it as like a self massager, but you have these like compression socks on that do it for you. That's the best way I can describe it. So that's something I started tracking as well. Like, how often do I go? Like, am I going consistently? Right. So another way of thinking about this, like, we're sprinting all the time, right? As athletes, we're sprinting all the time, but then we also need to uh, recover from that, right? So we're pushing our bodies, we're pushing our brains, we're pushing our mental capacity, but then what are we doing actively to recover from that as well? And that was something I wasn't focused on as much. So now I'm actively focusing on that by tracking my mood, taking naps, going to the sauna, doing the cold tubs, right? Journaling is something I've been doing every day already. So I'm still kind of like keeping track of that a little bit, but I'm also bringing more awareness to my evening ritual, because I know how important sleep is for recovery. So I'm tracking consistently. Am I doing my evening ritual consistently? And even though I've been doing my evening ritual for, I don't know, probably like 11 years now, I've noticed when I was being very honest with myself, I maybe did it like 3 or 4 times out of the week. And so I said to myself, oh, what if I bumped it up to 5 or 6 times a week? What would that do for me? Right. So that was one of the hypotheses that I had. And I also have a fitness tracker called the Aura Ring. You've probably heard me talk about that. It's kind of like a Apple Watch, but in the shape of a form of a ring. So it tracks your sleep, it tracks your HRV, which is heart rate variability, and all these other cool things to kind of like help you gauge how well you recover, right? So if you have a Whoop band or something, or like a Fitbit, it's kind of like that, but in the shape of an Oura ring. So I've been really focused on just tracking these different things and kind of trying to figure out, like, where is this going? Like, how is this generating results? And so happy to share a little bit about that more later. But the big key takeaway here is that I have found, and as you mentioned, the more you can measure your progress, for any goal that you set for yourself, the more likely it is that you'll actually accomplish it.
Yeah, we record these episodes alongside the dojo, which I mentioned was our productivity community. And I asked, how are things going with your goal? And it's pretty interesting. Everybody who replied, Lee, Kim, Tammy, pretty much said something similar, which is earlier in the year, their goals took a big hit, but now it's starting to get on track. So I think this episode is going to come out right at the right time, because people are finally are able to, we're all kind of getting over, or many of us are getting over the kind of the shock that happened with the quarantine and everything early, and now we're getting back to really focusing on our goals. So yeah, the key we want you to take away from this is, when you are making your goal, or when you're looking back and reviewing your goal, like, ask yourself, did you do everything you could to set yourself up for success? Because it's one thing to just make a goal and decide we're going to do it, but have you actually thought through some things that will make it more likely for you to succeed? Like, let's say your goal is to, I don't know, I'm just making this up, but learn how to paddleboard, stand up paddleboard. Well, have you made sure your weekends are cleared so that you don't have things that are going to totally disrupt the schedule? Because if you hadn't done that, then everything else is going to be more difficult. So think to yourself, what have you done to set yourself up for success, and look to apply that for your goals going forward. So that's the first thing. The second thing, speaking of making it more likely that that we can succeed in our goals, is one of the things that I like to ask myself, and we've found that can be really helpful, is to think to yourself, what have you done to make it easier and more likely that you're going to achieve it? So I just mentioned one example, which was freeing up your weekends if you're interested in learning how to do something that would more likely be successful on the weekends. But what are some things, once you've been going with your goal for a while, are there some things you can do to make it easier to accomplish going forward? So for me, with my journaling progress, one thing I did is I made sure that I was using journaling prompts. And we talked about this recently in TPS 301, which is our 301, which is our journaling episode that we did recently. And I found it hard to stick with my journaling habit when I just had that blank page, then I was trying to think of things to talk about. So in order to make it more easy and more likely that I would succeed, I started using prompts. Another thing I did is, because I was upping the number of days a week that I wanted to make sure that I was journaling. Another thing I did is I had a keyboard cover for my iPad, but I didn't usually have it on when I'm at home. I use it more when I'm traveling and that sort of thing. So what I started to do is leave it on my iPad on weekends. And then when I'm upstairs in the kitchen or whatever, I would just grab my iPad and do the journaling, because I had this kind of mental resistance to going down to my office during the weekends, because for me, my office is like a place of work, not a place of, not something I spend a huge amount of time in on the weekends. So by having my iPad there ready to go, it was much more likely that I would be consistent with it on the weekends. Weekdays, no problem, but on the weekends, it really helped with that. How about you, Tan? Is there anything, once you had started doing your setting things up for success for getting into that more relaxed state, is there things that you did to make it more easy for the rest of the year to accomplish that?
Yeah. First and foremost, I started tracking it, right? So I put it in a Google Sheet, and then I initially did it myself. So I kind of looked at, okay, how often did I go to the sauna? How much time did I spend doing this and that? And I kind of created a Google Sheet for myself to put this in place and kind of learn how to like count stuff and how to actually measure stuff, and then also how to visually represent it in a graph, and all the little details that come with that. But then once I did it for a few weeks, I said, okay, you know what? This process seems to be working. I'm going to teach my executive assistant on how to do this. And so I walked her through the process of like, hey, if you see this on my calendar, that means I went to the sauna. So you should update this particular cell this way. And so now I'm just going about my life. And the only thing I have to fill in is the Aura Ring stats, because she doesn't have access to that. It's only me who has access to that. So that's the only thing I fill in. And then everything else is kind of taken care of by her. So she makes my life easier in that sense. But I did it first, right? I kind of figured out a process first, trying to create a vision of what I was wanting to have, and made that come true. And then once that process was in place, then I kind of like started delegating that. So that's something you want to consider as well. Maybe it's like measuring, stuff that you do, and then have someone else help you out with that. That's something you could delegate and offload or outsource. But think of ways where you can have other people help you out with your goals as well, right? It doesn't have to be all you who does things. So that's something that made my life a little easier. The other thing is kind of like how we like to color code our calendars. I like to color code stuff as well in my Google Sheet. So in the beginning, it was just like a raw sheet, bunch of white cells and all sorts of numbers. And then once I kind of figured out like, okay, if I went to the sauna twice a week, that's considered a green. So let's color that green. So that means that's good, right? And if it's below that, then we should color it red. And so over time, as you're kind of like tracking stuff, you can just see by the colors how you're doing, right? This is mostly green. Is it mostly red? If it's mostly red, that's not good, right? So you're behind on a lot of different things. But if it's mostly green, then you're like, oh, okay, I'm punching above my weight. I'm doing a good job, staying on track. If it's kind of like a mixture of like red and green, then you're like, I could probably do a little bit better, right? So that's something I found to be helpful as well.
It's interesting, total side tangent, but it's interesting how with things like spreadsheets, a little bit of visual design can go a long way, both with being able to work with the spreadsheet and also interpreting things on the spreadsheet. So this is something I've actually tried to improve. Maybe we should do a podcast episode on something like this someday. But this is something I've been trying to improve when I do spreadsheets, is to see how visually I can make it easier to enter and interpret. So good call. The key, though, is once you've been working towards your goal for a while, so whether you're getting to a quarter, mid-year, maybe you do quarterly goals, maybe you're looking at it partway through the quarter, whatever your time period is, once you've been working at it for a while, what you want to do is take a step back and think, what can I do to make accomplishing this goal easier? Like, are there steps I can remove? Is there a tool I can install that will make it easier? Is there somebody I can talk to? Like you mentioned getting your executive assistant involved. Like, for example, maybe you are doing something where you have to manually enter information, and that's great. That was a fast and easy way to get started, but maybe you can apply some automation now to eliminate those steps. So that's the sort of thing you want to look at. What can I do now to make it easier? Because getting started is great. It's actually the most important thing, getting started, but now you want to make your life easier as you go forward. All right, the third thing we want to talk about is how you know if you're on track for your goal. So you talked about this already. So this is something that's been a big part for you, which is that tracking piece. That has been really key for you. You mentioned to get going. For myself, it's kind of similar because I made my goal more a numeric, that I was going to complete a certain amount of journal entries every month. So what I did is I created a Google Sheet, and at the end of May, I had completed 144 for the year. So I'm 50% towards my new goal, which is great, which is about, I'm a bit ahead of schedule actually. And that's something that I never would have realized if I wasn't tracking, that I was, I had actually estimated too low. I was just doing my goal was 5 days a week, but I found that I could do a lot more. So now I'm 24 ahead of schedule. Not that I'm going to stop, but it's good to know that because when you track it, then you can apply improvements, and it just becomes a self-reinforcing thing. Like the other day, I just hit 100 straight days of meditating. My Calm app tells me. So that's great. When I see that number, it just makes me want to continue and go forward. So tracking is really, really helpful for that.
I found that when it comes to tracking, if you track too many different things, it can always be really confusing as well, right? So I mentioned earlier how I track like how often I go to the sauna, right? And like I'm tracking my HRV, I'm tracking my sleep, I'm tracking my daily mood. How often did I do the cold tubs? Did I journal? Did I follow my evening ritual? And that can be really overwhelming too. So I want to encourage everyone not to track too many different things. Um, the fewer things you track, the better, right? So I would always say, hey, when it comes to like, for example, fitness, if you track your weight and your body fat, that's like two key measurements that you can kind of guesstimate in a way that you're on track or not, right? And if you want to add in a third metric, you could say if you want to measure your waist size on a regular basis, you can kind of track generally if you're on track or not, because generally the idea there is that if your waist size is going down, even if your weight is staying the same, that you are generally losing body fat. And the reverse is also true. If your waist size is going up, chances are your body fat is going up as well, right? So we want to look for those like key drivers in our goals as well, right? So even though I'm tracking all these different things, the two things I really look for the most is how often I do these relaxing activities like the sauna, and then also the readiness score in my Oura ring, because that score kind of encompasses like all these other different metrics, because when the Oura ring kind of calculates the readiness score of how well you've recovered throughout the day or throughout the week, it takes into account the sleep, right? It takes into account your HRV levels. It takes into account like how many calories you burned the previous day, how much you walked the previous day, how intense your workouts were, blah, 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 right? It tracks like 50 different metrics and then comes up with one score. And so that kind of allows me to say that's kind of like the weight measurement on a scale. If I step on a scale, that's the thing I look out for, right? But then also on top of that, I track how often I go to the sauna, because that's something I can control. It's like a leading indicator in that sense of like, hey, am I actively following through on being more relaxing and taking more time for myself for recovery, right? So you don't want to track too many different things. So when in doubt, track fewer items. At most, like one or two is what I would recommend. Maybe a third if you're a little bit more advanced. But there's only like very few things you have to track.
Yeah, the key is you just want a way to know whatever that is, that you're making progress on your goals. Not everything can be reduced to numbers. We totally get that. And even if things can be reduced to numbers, maybe you just don't feel like you would be consistent at, tracking some number and putting it in a spreadsheet. That's fine. Like whatever works for your particular goals. Maybe it's just saying, like you gave a perfect example. Maybe it's just saying like red, yellow, green. That's how you did towards your goal that day. Maybe you don't need to track specific numbers, but just some way so that you know you're making progress is the key. Even if something's not numbers based, you can still have some way of knowing. All right, so we are going to wrap up with our final thing, which is what are some learnings or improvements that we can make for the rest of the year? We're recording this and it's halfway through the year, so we still have another year to go. So we could just coast on what we're doing now and see how that goes. That is one approach. But we are all about #Kaizen here at Asian Efficiency, so we always want to try and improve things a little bit. So what are some things, or on the flip side, you want to look ahead and see, are there any danger signs looking ahead for the rest of the year? Are there any things that are going to or you suspect are going to cause you problems? Because that's something you want to know too as you're going into another time period with your goals. So for myself, like I said, we're recording this in the middle of the year. It's about to be the thick of summer. Usually in the summer, there's for me personally, there's lots of distractions and disruptions because my kids are out of school. Marmel and I recorded a podcast episode all about this in TPS309. So if you're in that situation, give that a listen. We give some strategies for dealing with that. Now this year it's a little different because of the whole quarantine situation. I have no idea what this summer is going to look like, but my summer and the quarantine are good examples of how you want to take your current situation into account. We couldn't have possibly known that life was going to totally change when we recorded that episode back, TPS294, when we recorded that episode back at the end of Q1. But we do know, there are some things we do know. So I need to make sure that whatever my goals are, they make sense.
One thing I've found that I think if I had to look ahead and figure out, okay, this is something that might hold me back or might make me fall off, is stopping the whole tracking in general, right? So if I skip a week or 1 week turns into 2 weeks and then into 3 weeks, that would be something that I would go, I have this negative momentum. Why does it matter at this point, right? So that's why I have this check-in with my executive assistant, because I want to offload it to her. So it's not my responsibility anymore. Now it's her responsibility. But because we have a weekly check-in, we know that, okay, this is something we're going to look at together, and if she has any questions, great. So in a way, that is my form of accountability, right? And so that's something I've kind of like anticipated, because I know, because I travel, I have lots of stuff going on. If I do all the tracking myself, I know sometimes, based on my own history and record, that sometimes I will miss stuff. And so having her helping me out is something that would kind of like alleviate that a little bit. The other thing I'm trying to figure out myself is kind of like, what's a good baseline? Meaning, if I go to the sauna twice a week, is that good enough? Or do I need to up it to 3 times a week? Or can I get away with just 1 time a week? Right. So I'm still collecting all this data and trying to figure out, like, okay, how much do I really need this? And to what extent? Same thing with my sleep. Do I need 7 hours, or can I get away with 6 hours and 32 minutes or something? Right. And early indicators are showing that if I sleep for 6 hours and 40 minutes, I'm in the green zone, but anything below than that is yellow. But that's something I'm learning about myself, right? So I'm collecting all these data points just to learn about myself, what is actually a good baseline, so that I can know that, this is what I should call a green, and this is what I should call a red, and this is what I should call a yellow or orange. So for me, it's just continuously collecting. That's why it's so important for me to have my assistant help me out, so that I don't get off track, right? So if you don't have an assistant, what if you had some sort of accountability partner that you can have a weekly like accountability meeting with, or that you check in with, or if someone just like you has goals as well, you can kind of meet up and hold each other accountable. It's one of the reasons why we create the dojo, right, which is Asian Efficiency Private Community, because people can hold each other accountable there. They post their stuff, their goals, and want to be held accountable for that. And that's what we help with too. So that's why we or that's one of the many reasons why we started that community.
Yep. So this is everything we've been talking about, right? It's setting yourself up for success. It's making things easier. It's having some sort of tracking and knowing if you're making progress. Uh, it's putting all this into practice for this goal and to improve and make a note of this stuff for your future goals. It's great to nail down the rest of the year, at least try to. But when you're making these goals next year, you want to put these learnings into place. Coming up with ideas is one thing, but you need to put it into practice. Chandler in the dojo gives a good example of some of this stuff where he said he started, what his goal was to start an online music class, and then he found that the time commitment as he went through the year was, this first half of the year was just it was just too much with work, family and friends, and relaxing and all that sort of stuff. So he had a few different choices, right? He could have just kept on grinding, and and probably led himself to energy problems later. But what he decided to do is reprioritize on the family and work, and then have those videos to go through on his own time versus trying to grind through the course. So that's a perfect example of taking some of these learnings that he's been doing throughout the first half of the year and applying them to the second half of the year. So Tan, what should that's what Chandler's doing. What should the people do for the rest of this year once they listen to this podcast?
Yeah, as always, with the Productivity Show and anything that we do at the Asian Efficiency, which is the company behind this podcast, we always want to make things simple and actionable. That is what we are known for. And the same is true for this podcast. So what we encourage you to do is to look at your goals. And if you lost them or you don't have anyone right now to help you with this, revisit this episode, but come up with your own goals. So if you don't have any, come up with them now. It's never too late to start, right? And then look at what you can do for the rest of the year to still accomplish those goals. And if you're off track, what is something that you can do to get back on track based on the things that we've talked about today? So come up with a list of things that will make it easier for you to follow through, or make it more likely that you'll achieve the goals this year, and use the frameworks and tactics and strategies that we talked in today's episode. So if you want to find everything that we talked about today, you can go to our show notes. So if you listen to the podcast app, just swipe, you'll see the show notes there, or you can go to theproductivityshow.com/308.